This is the Pet Buzz.
This is the Pet Buzz.
And here's the Dynamic Pet Duo.
Dr. Perri, thanks for joining the Pet Buzz today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, what advances in the isolation and sequencing of ancient DNA reveal about the population's histories of both people and dogs?
Well, it's interesting. Since DNA has really come along and been used in archaeology in kind of the last 10, 15 years, what the DNA has shown between the relationship with humans and dogs really is that a very simple message: where people go, dogs go. So we see similarities in the growth of populations, the split of populations, and the movement of populations of both humans and their dogs.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So, it's interesting because reading your study was fascinating for me, considering we had one of your colleagues, Greg Larson, on our show probably in the last 6 weeks, and he was great. So when comparing population genetic results of humans and dogs from Siberia, and hopefully I say this right, Benrigia and North America.
Beringia. It's not, doesn't roll right off the tongue.
Beringia. Aren't they islands or something? Beringia?
Well, the Bering Sea is essentially where it is, right? Okay. And so Beringia doesn't exist now. Beringia is essentially a land bridge that freezes over in times of glacial periods, right? So it's frozen over multiple times in the past millions of years, and this just happened to be one of those times where it freezes over. And when it does, that means people and animals can move between Siberia and the Americas.
Yeah. So when you compared, what did you find out when you did Beringia, Siberia, and North America? What did the research reveal?
Well, about 2 years ago, we had done a paper on kind of the evolutionary history of dogs in the Americas. We wanted to know when did dogs come to the Americas, and are any of our dogs now kind of related to these ancient Native American dogs?
Wait, we have those questions, but a little later after you answer this
one.
Of
course, yeah. So we wanted to kind of look at, we knew that people had come over from Beringia and Siberia region, the ancestors of Native Americans had come over from that area, and that they had essentially brought their dogs at some point. We didn't really know when. But what our recent research showed is that the splits in human populations that we know about from the kind of glacial period in Siberia and across Beringia, those splits we see in human populations eventually leading to the ancestors of Native Americans were spot on for the splits that we were seeing in ancient populations of American, Siberian, and Beringian dogs. So again, where humans go, dogs go.
Cool. That's good.
So tell us about the first people who came to the Americas and their dogs. Maybe talk to us about why and when they came and how they lived with their dogs.
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting and fraught question, I would say. So for about the last 10 or 20 years, the peopling of the Americas has really been one of these hot topics in archaeology. People trying to figure out when exactly did people come, where did they come from, and how did they come. So in the last few years, the debate has really been about whether they came via the coast or an interior route. And of course, one of the questions has been, did they come with their dogs? And so we think that sometime around 15,000 years ago, people made it into the Americas, the ancestors of Native Americans. And our DNA shows that we have a split in ancient dog populations within the Americas around 15,000 years ago. So what we see in the dogs seems to kind of jive with what's going on right now in the kind of human archaeology debates.
So then they were wolves, I think, primarily, weren't they? That category?
We know that the ancestor of all dogs is a gray wolf population, but what we've just recently figured out is that we believe that wolf population is actually extinct, no longer exists, and we have yet to find it. So all of the wolves that we have attempted to match to dogs as the kind of stock population that gave rise to dogs, none of them match. So we're still really on the hunt for where is that source population. And now we believe we'll probably find it somewhere in Siberia.
Ah, interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what roles were those domesticated wolves playing within the human society then?
God, you're asking all the good
I
questions.
know.
I
Well,
write them.
I would say I used to be a real strong proponent of that hunting must have been one of the first uses of dogs. But now that we're starting to look towards Siberia and the Beringian area, um, I have to believe that the first use of dogs must have been sledding and pulling transport dogs across these large kind of Arctic environments, pulling people essentially into the Americas, followed not long after by hunting. But really, what we do know about dogs archaeologically and through kind of research with ethnographic groups now is that a dog is essentially a really great Swiss Army knife, right? So a dog can be transport and hunting, but it also makes a really great bed warmer, and it makes a really good alarm system and a really good protective system and a really good cleanup system around your campsite. And in emergencies, you know, at that time, I'm sure that use as food and a fur source was also one of the uses for dogs. So dogs really do so much for us and for our ancestors moving into the Americas. I'm sure that they were kind of a Swiss Army knife of everything.
You know, it's funny that you say that because, you know, as I'm thinking about relationships and how they form, I was thinking that one of the first uses of dogs would be for protection. As that humans and dogs became friends and a dog was nearby because has different olfactory, different hearing, or better, I should say, olfactory glands, better hearing system, that they would probably be used as a protection vehicle or an alert system.
Definitely. I think that anyone who has a dog knows that, um, you know, dogs are always hearing things we're not hearing. They're always alert to noises outside and strangers coming by and, you know, things going on with our children. So I have to believe that this natural alertness and desire to protect and defend is something that, you know, early Native Americans and people in Siberia must have found incredibly useful. And so I'm sure that that was one of the very first uses of dogs.
I kind of laugh as a practitioner for a long period of time. I practiced almost for 50 years, and I've watched the cultural changes, or I should say, the roles that pets play in the lives of people. And it's really interesting with what you're discussing, what the role was at first and where it is now. And just in the last 15, 20 years, how it's
Yeah,
changed so much. They aren't
yeah,
protecting, they're an emotional stability factor for us.
definitely. I would say that a lot of my work focuses on essentially what a dog is the dog is the advent, the beginning of animal biotechnology, right? Our very first relationship with any domestic animal was with a dog, and a dog is the first animal that we figured out is not just a wild creature that we interact with from afar, but an animal that can come into our kind of domestic sphere, into our home, and do many things for us, and that we can ask to do many things for us
And,
as well. And so, as
and
you're
learns our
saying,
language and learns our language.
Yes.
exactly. And like you're saying, you think about the things that we have dogs do for us now. We're testing dogs, we're treating dogs as kind of COVID testing things now, right? Every time I go through an airport, a dog is sniffing my bag to see if there's fruit or other agricultural goods in my bag. You know, we train dogs, we've turned dogs into kind of the ultimate technology. We can really have a dog do anything for us that we ask it to do, you know, for using them as blind guides. I mean, really, it's across the entire spectrum what we've asked dogs to do for us. And this really started, we think, in Siberia as doing these kind of very first tasks for us. And from there, just branching out into, you know, everything that a dog does now.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. So when did the first people come here? I mean,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would say a comfortable time period that most people would kind of agree to is somewhere around 15,000 years ago, that the first Native American ancestors moved into the Americas with their dogs, and from there moved very rapidly across far northern into Canada, and eventually made their way into Greenland, and then all the way across the United States and down into South America.
15,000 years ago.
what
Yeah.
wasn't even Couldn't even think about it.
I mean, if you think about it, if you're going into a completely new world where humans have never been before, you don't know about the landscape, you don't know about the predators there, you don't know anything about this world, having a dog or dogs, a pack of dogs by your side as a kind of defense system is a really good way to move into a completely new environment that
Sure.
you have no idea what to expect there.
Then why not stay in California where it's warm and sunny?
Hmm?
Well, back then.
A lot of them did. There's a lot of really nice coastal sites in California.
Cool. So, what do you think the future archaeologically and genetic research will reveal about the mutual relationship between people and dogs? I mean, is that probably your next step?
Yeah, I mean, we have kind of our feelers out on so many different interesting kind of avenues of research. I would say one way that kind of archaeology and genetics is going right now is to look away from just population-wide and really drill down into
I think we
understanding the kind of individual lives of a single dog.
Okay.
Oh, am I still here?
Yeah, you're still here. Just repeat
Okay.
what you just last said because we lost you for a second.
Right. So I think that the way that archaeology and genetics is moving right now, research-wise, is to really move away from population-wide analyses and thinking of dogs as this kind of monolithic thing, and trying to understand better individual canine lives. So when we find an individual dog, trying to figure out everything we can about that one individual dog. What was its life like? What was its diet like? What was its relationship with its people like? And trying to better understand kind of the human dog ancient relationship through individual kind of canine lives. And then of course, DNA has really no limits at this point. So the more samples we find, the more archaeological sites are uncovered, the more data we can recover. We're really interested in some of the kind of more fun questions as well. Like, what did the first dogs look like? What was their fur color? Did they have curly tails and floppy ears? These are the questions that I get all the time from just kind of the average dog owner. What did they look like? Were there lots of them, or were there only a few of them? So these are really interesting things to kind of look into as well.
Sure. I'm just curious. What's the nearest genetic relative of those dogs 15,000 years ago today?
Well, I do get a lot of questions about ancient breeds and people being very interested in, having a dog that has some kind of old lineage. And we know that the ancient dogs that first came with Native Americans have largely been wiped out by the dogs brought by European colonists. So we find very little kind of genetic signal of those dogs. But what we do know is that Arctic dogs, such as Huskies, Malamutes, Greenland sledge dogs, do have a fairly ancient signature that they were brought with a migration of Arctic peoples sometime around 1,000 years ago. So really, if you want an ancient American dog, your best bet is to get yourself, a Husky.
So who's been around longer, the dogs or the cats?
Oh, definitely the dogs. Dogs win on that one.
Okay, good.
Dogs went on that. Well, Dr. Perri, thank you so much for joining us today. We've really enjoyed talking to you.
Yes, we did.
And I think I didn't think you were American.
I am American, yes.
Through and through.
I am.
Sure. So,
Yes.
well, it's nice
Very
to
much
have
so.
you.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Great. Well, everyone, that was Dr. Angela Perri from Newcastle University discussing the people of the Americas and the domestication of their dogs. Up next, Celebrity Pet Buzz and Flex Facts. You want to stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Pet Buzz.